This is Kim, the Kiwi Health Detective, root cause analysis and lifestyle medicine practitioner. And today I'm going to be talking about the dehumanizing of humanity. So have you noticed over the past 10, 20, 30 years that we seem to be becoming more and more disconnected from ourselves and from others? And I'm going to share a few thoughts and ruminations that I've been mulling on for some time now, especially over the past 5 years, and just see, does any of this resonate with you? Now, one of the things that tends to really annoy me is the fact that there seem to be less and less actual humans able to help you when you need service or support from an organization. So, for example, a lot of websites now have AI chatbots, and you simply cannot contact another human being until you've first gone through the chatbot, and then maybe finally you may be guided to contact an actual real live human customer service agent. Or how about when you phone your bank or your utility service provider, and all you really want to do is speak to a human and ask some questions and have a conversation. But no, you have to go through, first of all, several menus, and then you have to speak into the phone and tell them what your problem is. So essentially, you are talking and conversing with a robot. And then finally, if you're lucky, you may end up talking to a customer service agent. Or what about when you go to the shops, and whereas you used to check out at the supermarket with a real live human being, more and more we are now being directed to check ourselves out, self-service. And whilst some supermarkets still have some human beings, some supermarkets don't have any at all. And if you go to a country like Japan, for example, they seem to be really into the robots being the customer service agents. So you can go to a hotel and interact with a robot instead of a human being when you're checking in. And this theme of interacting with an AI agent or a chatbot, or just only being able to communicate back and forth via messaging on an online portal, for example, the Inland Revenue in New Zealand, or the Department of Social Development, or whatever they're called in New Zealand, in order to communicate with somebody, you either have the choice of going through 10,000 different menus on the phone, waiting 2 hours to speak to somebody, and then finally you might get to speak to a human being, or you can send messages through their intranet. And for the MSD, you simply cannot even send a message on their intranet portal. So it is the most frustrating thing ever to try and get through to them. And what about when you're entering some information on a website and it asks you, are you a robot or are you human? You're actually being asked to identify if you're a robot or if you're a human. And so many of us have got so used to this that we don't even question it now. But there's a sort of a programming going on beneath the scenes, which is not so healthy. So technology has really been taking over in the last few decades. And for myself, I remember back in the 80s, I went to secretarial college. There was no such thing as a computer. We learned to type on typewriters, and we did shorthand. And it was the 80s that they started to bring computers into offices. And I was quite quickly involved in that because I was temping at the time. So slowly computers came in and we started to get acclimatized to using computers. And of course, if we go back even further in time, there used to be the radio, and then the television was brought in, and people started to be hypnotized and mesmerized by the television. And if you watch James Corbett's video series on the history of media, it is very, very interesting how he talks about the intentional programming of people through the television. So I highly recommend you go and watch his video series called something like The History of Media. So we have TVs coming in the 1950s, then we have computers coming in the 80s and 90s, and then we're moving from landlines to cell phones in the 2000s, and we're moving from initial dial-up to Wi-Fi, and with that bringing a whole heap of EMF, which is really affecting our brains and our cognition in a not very healthy way whatsoever, and that is all being denied still by the telco companies. So more and more, without even realizing it, and until you actually stop and look back and track how things have changed over the last 40 years, we have really been programmed to become dependent more and more on this technology. Computers, laptops, iPads, cell phones, smartwatches, apps, and more we're becoming tied to our technology. For example, if you were to imagine not being able to access the internet, how would that affect your life? If you couldn't have a cell phone, how would that affect your life? Personally, I've always liked having a landline, and very sadly, since I moved down to the South Island and I've been living in newer homes, there are no landline sockets anymore in New Zealand houses which are new. They simply don't supply them anymore. There is no possibility of having a landline anymore. So we're really reliant on the cell phone for communication. So from everything that I've said so far, you may be thinking to yourself, well, so what? What's the problem with all of this? I'm quite happy with my cell phone and my apps and my smartwatch and my smart TV and my computer. But if you zoom out and take the bird's eye view and look down at this change that has happened, which is actually now 70 years really, if we think about from the 1950s to now, so 75 years. If we zoom out and look at this progression of the introduction of technology into our lives, it really has taken us over. And more there is a plan, so to speak, by whoever it is that makes these decisions. For example, digital identities coming in. And if you haven't got the right digital identity, then you won't be able to do certain things. Just today, I went to log into a website, and I like to log in with an email and a password, and it no longer gave me that option. I either had to sign in through Google or through Facebook, and there was one other option, I can't remember what it was. But what if I don't want that choice? What if I want to use an email and a password? Well, they take the choice away, and so this is a form of control. And people are being controlled more and more through technology, but unless you stop and recognize what is happening, it's happening so slowly, like a frog boiling in a pot of water. That analogy, if you've heard of it, where you put a frog, it's a horrible picture really, but you put a frog in a pot of cold water, and then you start heating that water up, and it doesn't notice that the water is boiling until it's too late. So that is a little like what has been happening really over the last 75 years. Very, very slowly, more and more technology has been introduced until we're now reliant on it, and many people are even addicted to it. And many of us are interacting primarily through technology. And one thing I haven't mentioned so far is that so many young people play video games, and they become very, very addicted on these games. And of course, for younger people, they don't know what it was like before this technology was here. They were born into it, and they're very used to it and it's just normal for them. But let's look at where this might be going and where some people say it is going. And the word here is transhumanism. So there are two people that I've come across recently who are experts in this field. They've been researching and writing and speaking about it for 10, 20 plus years now. And their names are Patrick Wood and David Hughes. And David Hughes has written a book called COVID-19 and the War on Technocracy. And they have spoken many, many times on many webinars and symposiums and summits on this topic. And it's really quite concerning what they are saying. Basically, what they are seeing as a potential is that more and more technology will be merged with humans so that we eventually could become cyborgs. In other words, we will really lose our humanity. Technology will be implanted into us more and more so that we become half technology, half human. Now, is that something you want? Personally, for me, it's an absolute no. And I'm going to share more on why that is in a moment, because that's tied up with what the causes and the solutions to all of this if we don't want to go down that track. Already, Elon Musk has implanted chips in the brains of people to help them control their minds. And whilst there may be really good reasons for doing that, anything can be used for not so good reasons. And some people have already had chips implanted into their hands so that they no longer have to use their EFTPOS card or even their phone to pay for things in a shop. They just wave their hand across the device. Is this something that you want? And David Hughes says that eventually what they're wanting to do, whoever they are, is to hook everybody up to the cloud so that everything can be read back and forth between your brain and the cloud. And my question to you is this what you want? Are you happy with this? Do you want to be a human or do you want to be a robot? And Elon Musk has also said that he plans to roll out millions of robots and have them walking around the streets just like humans do. Is this what you want? So I like to look at the bigger picture of everything and take the bird's eye view and actually even what I call the spaceship view and look at the world and ask myself, why is this happening? And what is it that we need to do to change it if we're not happy with it? And one of the things that I've learned through studying what are called the ageless wisdom teachings over the last 25 years is that there is a much, much bigger picture of history for humanity than we tend to be aware of, mainly because the history that we've been taught is very, very limited. The history that most people have been taught in the Western world says that humans have only been around for maybe 5,000 years. And even people like Greg Braden are saying, oh, humans have been around for maybe 20,000 years. Or I don't know if he says 20,000 or 200,000, but that's as far as he goes. But the ageless wisdom teachings say that humanity has been around for millions of years. And there is a huge epoch of time which we cycle through over and over again. And in the Indian tradition, these epochs of time are called yugas. And at the moment, we're in what is called the Kali Yuga, which translates as the Dark Ages. And what is actually happening is that over these huge epochs of time, we descend into matter from spirit and we become materialistic. We descend into materialism. And once it gets to its extreme point, which is how yin and yang works, once something gets to its extreme, it starts to turn back towards the other side. Then we start moving back up into spirit, so to speak. Now, this is a very, very complex topic, and I recommend that if you're seriously interested in learning about it, then go to esotericastrologer.org and seek out the Aquarian Mysteries video series and start to watch that. It's a series of 40 video lessons, which one buys in chunks of 10 lessons at a time. And that will give you the much, much bigger picture of the hidden history of humanity. And you can also watch the free documentary film called The Hidden History of Humanity by the same person, which is Philip Lindsay. So from a bigger perspective, humanity has been around for millions of years, and we cycle into loops of going into materialism, descending into materialism, where we become very materialistic and we become more and more disconnected from the spiritual aspect of ourselves. And this is where we are now. We have descended down into materialism, and this movement or trend towards transhumanism and technocracy and technology taking over is all part and parcel of this move into materialism. And the reality is, we all have a choice. We all have a choice whether we want to continue on this downward spiral, so to speak, and wherever that will take us, or we can choose to start moving ourselves upwards back towards our spirituality, our spiritual selves. So each person has a choice. It's an individual choice. And the more people that move in one direction, the more it will drag everybody else with them until they decide to turn around and go in the opposite direction. Now, also, in the bigger scheme of things, humanity evolves its consciousness. We're on a journey of evolution of consciousness, and we evolve through crisis. So, for example, when we have a personal crisis, and you may be able to relate to something that's happened in your life where you went through some sort of crisis, as you went through this and you navigated it and you came out the other side, you come through as a changed person, and hopefully you come through as a better person. It may have been a very painful experience, but if you navigate that crisis and you learn the lessons that you're meant to learn, then you come through as a changed human being. You have transformed. And as my first Qigong teacher used to say, healing is transformation. You change and you're never the same again. So we don't go backwards to where we were or who we were. We move forwards and we evolve ourselves into something new. And in the Qigong school that I'm with, one of our meditations, at the beginning of every meditation, it says, I am ready to welcome a different me every day. And this reminds us that we are here to evolve and to grow. So each of us as a human being is here to evolve our consciousness individually, but we're also doing it collectively. And as we evolve our consciousness, we go through different levels. It's like we jump up to new levels of consciousness. And these are called initiations. When we have a very big leap of consciousness, a transformation, often it is such a big shift that it is indicative that we have gone through an initiation. And currently, humanity collectively is going through a collective initiation, which is why we're in this huge crisis point in the world. Nobody can deny that we are in chaos in the world right now. It is really a collective insanity that is going on right now. And this is part and parcel of a collective transformation of consciousness for humanity. Now, a few years ago, I ran an online summit, which you can still access, called Awaken. And I interviewed many different teachers of consciousness on this topic of awakening. So If you want to go and watch that, it is still available. And I'm actually in the process of creating a new website where all this content will be housed. So we've looked at what is going on, this journey into technocracy and transhumanism. And we've looked at very briefly some of the causes of why this is going on in the bigger scheme of things. So what are the solutions? If you do not wish to continue on this downward movement of materialism into greater and greater realms of technocracy and transhumanism, if you wish to turn around and start moving back up towards the spiritual side of yourself, towards your humanity, what is it that we need to do? Well, the more we descend into materialism, the more we become disconnected from who we are at a soul level and a spiritual level. And interestingly enough, back in the early 1900s, Rudolf Steiner, who founded the Steiner or Waldorf education, he said, and this was like over 100 years before it actually happened, he said that in the future, humanity would develop a vaccine which would disconnect people from their soul and spirit. And Thomas Meyer is a Waldorf teacher who has been talking a lot about this in the last few years. So you might like to also check out his book. But the solution is we need to refine our humanity and our humanness if that's what we choose to do. And the key is the heart. The key is reconnection with our heart. And more than that, cultivating what in Qigong we call our heart consciousness, which is called Xing Ling. So Xin is the heart, Ling is consciousness. So we need to cultivate our Xing Ling. We need to come back into our heart, which is the doorway to our soul and therefore our spirit. And we have to work on cultivating our heart and clearing out unhealthy patterns of consciousness, either unhealthy patterns of the heart consciousness or just our consciousness in general. And we all have unhealthy patterns. And I haven't got time to go into that now, but all humans have 10 fundamental unhealthy patterns. For example, competitiveness or greed or selfishness. These are very, very deeply embedded patterns, which if we want to change them, we have to do the hard yards. We have to do the work. They don't change by themselves. We have to put in the effort, and we have to have the tools to be able to do that. And that is what is provided, for example, in our Qigong school, where we have specific meditations for transforming the heart consciousness and specific exercises for transforming our unhealthy patterns. And I've been teaching this for many, many years and find it incredibly life-changing and satisfying. So the bottom line is, if we want to change, if we want to stop this downward spiral into materialism, and start moving upwards back towards our true self and our spiritual nature, we have to do the inner work, one person at a time. And every little effort we make contributes to improving the whole, the collective, because everything is connected. So this is what we need to do. We have to reconnect with our true nature, with our true self. We have to refine our humanity and our humanness, and the gateway is the heart. So I hope you have found this of interest. I will be speaking more on this topic in times to come, but for now, I will sign off. This is Kim Knight, the Kiwi Health Detective, root cause analysis and lifestyle medicine practitioner.